You might have seen a walkthrough video I did last year of an iOS-based app called Bias, an amp modeler that gives you the added option of diving deep into the inner workings of a digitally modeled guitar amplifier. The folks at Positive Grid have been hard at work on a new version of Bias that works as a plugin with your Mac or Windows-based DAW software. In this video, I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough of how the app works. Bias ships with a bunch of modeled amps that sound great right out of the box, and with its added tweaking options, you can dive deeper and tweak the tone even further, allowing you to achieve virtually any guitar sound you can imagine. To use Bias, you first choose from the large selection of included amps, ranging from models of old Fenders, Marshalls, Boogies, and others, to more modern amplifier makers such as Bogner, Matchless, Soldano, and others, as well as a few bass amps, acoustic simulator, an acoustic amp, and more. Amps are split up by sound categories such as clean, glassy, blues, crunch, etc. I'm going to go to the crunch category and select the British Plexi 50 watt, a model of an old Marshall Plexi. Let's give it a listen. Yep, sounds like an old Marshall to me. Now let's see what we can do with it. Since this amp is based on an old Marshall, I'm going to crank most of the knobs up, with the exception of the gain and the presence. I'm also going to back off a bit on the lows. I want a good amount of gain, but instead of jacking up the gain knob, I'm going to get that elsewhere. Along the top here, you'll see sections for preamp, tone stack, power amp, transformer, cabinet, and amp matching. These modules are where you'll do all your tweaking. You'll also notice two EQ modules. These can be dragged anywhere in your signal chain to further sweeten your sound. The first stop is the preamp section. You can switch to the preamp module from one of the other included amps, or just tweak this one. In here, you have high, mid, and low EQ controls to adjust the sound before it hits your preamp. You can select between different preamp tubes. You can add or remove tube stages. There's a bright switch. You can add preamp tube distortion. You can raise or lower the preamp's high and low cut frequencies. You can adjust preamp tube bias. And there's another EQ for basic tonal adjustment of the signal after it's gone through the preamp section. The gain knob here mirrors the gain knob on the front of your amp. Changing it here will also change it on the front of the amp. I'm not going to do a lot here in the preamp. I know I said I want a little more gain, but I'm not going to do that in here. I'll back off the lows on the input stage here just a little. I could get more gain by increasing tube stages, but that's not going to give me what I'm looking for. I'll leave the post EQ settings as they are. The next section is your tone stack. Here you can select different amps' tone stacks, allowing you to mix and match components of the included amps. For instance, this amp features the British Crunch tone stack, modeled on the tone stacks of all those old school Marshalls. As with the preamp section, I can easily change this to the tone stack from an old Fender Bassman or a Vox or any of a number of included amps. Each tone stack has its own unique effect on the amp's sound, and this makes for some interesting tonal combinations. With each selection, you get a nice description of what each tone stack will deliver. I'm going to stay with the British Crunch tone stack. The tone knobs here also mirror those on the front of your amp. Next is the power amp section. Again, you can either switch to the power amp section of another amp or just tweak this one. I'm going to make a few changes here. To the left, you can assign a different power tube topology, but I'm going to stay with push-pull for this sound. I'll keep the EL34 power tubes, and I'm not going to mess with the tube bias, but I am going to bump up the splitter gain and the power gain here. If I want, I can also add or reduce power tube distortion. These three controls really allow me to fine-tune my amp's drive. You can select between a vintage or more modern presence response, and the resonance control adjusts the amp's low-end resonance with settings for push or normal. I'm going to stay with normal. The presence and master knobs, again, mirror those of the amp's front panel. Alright, let's see how this sounds. Let me jack up the presence here. And we're getting there, but I think we can make it better. The next stop is the transformer section. In here, you can choose from between three transformer types: British, American, and Fat style. As with the tone stack, you get a description of what each transformer type is going to give you. I like a big sound, so I'm going to go with the Fat style transformer. Over here to the left, you can select from between a couple different rectifier tubes or a solid state rectifier. Additionally, you can tweak the compression effect of your rectifier on the included compressor. I like a more immediate response without the added sag of a rectifier tube, so I'm going to go with solid state here. Next is the cabinet section. In here you can choose from a large selection of speaker types and speaker cabinets, as well as some different microphones. You can place the microphone anywhere on the speaker and even move it closer to or further from the speaker. As in real-world amp setups, speaker type and mic placement can have a huge impact on your sound. I'm going to switch to the C414 and put it pretty close to the speaker, right on there between the dust cap and the rest of the speaker. Here's the original amp again without my tweaks. And here's the modified version. So you see, just as with its iOS counterparts, Bias Desktop is a killer tool for getting some really great guitar tones without having to crank an amp to get these sounds. With this being a plugin for use with your DAW, you can further enhance your sound with a virtually unlimited choice of effects plugins. Over the last several years, the line between real guitar amps and the digital modeling world has gotten a lot smaller, and for my money, the folks at Positive Grid are leading the charge. If you're a guitarist and use a DAW that supports VST or audio unit-based plugins, which most of them do, then this one's a no-brainer.